100 years, up to 2004, was pretty much, it's called Death Valley because no vegetation or life grows there. However, in 2004, in winter 2004, it rained for the first time in 100 years in Death Valley. And then in 2005, in spring, all of a sudden, there were blooms that started to grow. And what the idea was, Death Valley wasn't dead, it was just dormant. And all you needed was the right conditions for the buds to flourish. And so I think that concept can be applied to students as well. All students, I think, have the potential to be amazing, contributors to society. However, you will not be able to see their potential if you don't give them the conditions to which they can actually thrive.
All right. Thank you, Shadi, for joining us. This is going to be a discussion about your experience with education, and hopefully the information that you provide in the interview will be a resource to those at CSU Stan finishing their credential program in just a few months. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was just your background in education, kind of what led you to education, if you have any stories about what inspired you to become an educator.
Sure. I teach, we'll just give a little bit of background. I teach at Sherlock High School. This is my first year teaching. I teach two preps. I teach 3 periods of anatomy and physiology, and then 2 periods of honors chemistry. And so I have a degree in biology, specifically molecular microbial biology, and I have a minor in chemistry. And so I suppose the reason why I decided to choose teaching was actually because I swayed away from the medical field. After undergrad, I spent 2 years working initially as a medical scribe and then as a clinical manager. So I worked at a couple hospitals like DMC, Memorial, and then I worked at a couple of clinics where from scribe, I got promoted to clinical manager. And from there, working in the medical field for 2 years, I definitely learned a lot. Aside to which I was initially going to go to medical school, and that was the plan, kind of like all my life. But then I saw kind of like what I consider like the dark side of medicine. So we basically treated patients that have Medi-Cal. And so a lot of the patients were being taken advantage of by doctors. Doctors would be doing several, erroneous things such as overprescribing opioids. They'd be prescribing opioids over FaceTime, which is illegal. They'd be giving non-potent expired vaccines to patients. And this is all in Merced County. And you can actually if you Google Merced Fraud Clinic, like there's like, you're going to be inundated with sites that are all from the clinic that I used to work at, where I saw like, just terrible side of medicine. It went bankrupt. Like the company went bankrupt. The FBI came in. I saw the FBI. It was a whole ordeal. Like no joke. It's like in the movies. They're like 6'4". They're all wearing blue suits with briefcases. So the point is, after 2 years in that, I just, and for us, like I would say for us scribes, I considered us like the normal people. For us scribes that weren't involved with any of this, because it was mainly like the doctors and the CEO, we were just like, I cannot believe this is happening. And so a lot of us are swayed away from medicine. Like the CEO, she's in federal prison right now. So long story short, I work in that side of medicine, and I was like, okay, I wanted to help my community. I wanted to serve these patients as best I could. However, as a doctor, once I saw this side of medicine, this, how doctors take advantage of patients to get money, I was kind of like, you know what? I don't want to be involved with this anymore. I want to help my community still, but in a different way. And so I decided to do it through teaching. However, while I was getting ready for medical school and still working in the medical field, I also volunteered and tutored for some classes at Sherlock High School. So I volunteered for Mrs. Rain, or one of the teachers, AP Bio teachers at Sherlock High. I kind of tutored the AP Bio kids on the side. And then I also tutored some calculus kids and some physics kids on the side. And every time I would tutor them, the response I generally got was, wow, the way you teach me is so much better than my teacher. Or the way you teach me, I actually get it. And then, so the idea started getting sprung in my head, and I was like, interesting. So it sounds like at least I'm getting to these kids. What if I actually pursued a job in teaching? And so that's how I kind of, at least the thought started, rumbling in my head, especially when I started swaying away from the medical field. And so from there, I kind of gave it a shot. I took your class. I took the secondary to foundations and education, something like that, right? That class. And to kind of see, whether teaching was for me or not. And I really enjoyed it. And especially after doing the couple hours of observation, I was like, I can definitely see myself in this position. And so from there, I kind of decided to, hop into the credential program, and I don't regret a single moment. And so it's incredibly rewarding. The reactions I get from these kids, which I'll talk about later, the reactions I get and the influence and the impact I'm kind of making here is just like so beyond rewarding.
So you mentioned when you were tutoring that students were very receptive to your teaching strategies. And I'm going to put you on the spot. You're a new teacher, you're at Turlock High, but from what I hear from the students that I have that we share, you are extremely effective in the classroom. Students like you a lot, but they at the same time respect you. So there's a lot of people listening or will listen, and they want to know the secret to being a new teacher, to being liked, but at the same time being respected. Can you comment on that?
Okay, so basically the being liked part has to do with the fact that perhaps that I'm a little bit like younger, and I kind of still, and what I mean by that is I kind of still relate to a lot of the things that they do and they enjoy. For example, in social media, there are certain terms, like I will use the word, like just to be facetious, I'll use the word like bruh, or I'll reference certain, like maybe like a meme or something, just to kind of keep them engaged. It's my way of keeping them engaged and keeping them laughing. The type of personality I am is, I mean, I wouldn't say, some people would say immature, but the type I am is I just like to have fun while teaching. And like, I don't think there's nothing wrong with teaching, being able to educate and at the same time having fun. And so that's the kind of approach that I take. And so I try to make sure to keep them engaged. Every once in a while, if I feel that there's a kind of like a mundane 30-minute lecture, I'll kind of pause. What I'll do is I'll tell them like a quick story of something, maybe something that happened in undergrad and something that I know is funny and appropriate, of course. And so to kind of gear things back into shape, and then I, move on from there. So I just like to, and on top of that, like I just like, sometimes I think telling them certain personal stories that aren't like, too personal, but at the same time, they do get a glimpse of my life and kind of like the struggles that I'm going through, whether it be like applying for a master's or, being a new teacher. I kind of explain to them, guys, look, like I'm a new teacher, these are the things that I'm going through. They kind of see, and it's a sort of empathy that becomes established, and they kind of see like, whoa, this guy, is a real person. He has struggles too, like we all do, And I told them, like, for example, I was bullied in high school, and I feel for that, and I tell them, like, if there's anything I can do, like, I've experienced a lot, so this is where I can come in to try my best to help. And in regards to respect, I think part of it is, so all my life, I've always established leadership roles, or at least I've tried to. So for instance, I was, captain of multiple clubs in high school. In undergrad, I was the president of 3 clubs, including the Pre-L Society. And so I've always liked to take initiative. I love the autonomy. And then after that, as I mentioned before, I was the clinical manager. And so I hired and I fired all the time medical assistants. I would fire the medical assistants that I feel that, for example, would always be on their phones, would just not do the work. And I feel like, I told them, why would I sign your paycheck if you're just spending, half of your shift on your phone? And so I'd fire them on the spot. Also, when I would hire medical assistants, I would make sure that they actually had grammatical stuff correct on their resumes. Otherwise, for me, it's like, if you don't spend the time to at least check your grammar and spelling on a resume, there's no way in heck I'm going to hire you. So my point is, although that leadership, that level of leadership that I kind of started to develop over the years in my undergrad, high school, and then career, helped to create a sort of practice for me that I can also establish in my classroom, where when things get nitty and gritty, when we're having to do the work, like there's a part of me that kind of comes out, and I tell them, look, guys, like, if you're going to disrespect me, then we're definitely going to have an issue. And I kind of, it's almost like a mode that gets shut off or shut on depending on the situation. And I kind of give them options. Like, for example, I remember specifically there was a time where I warned these group of 4 students twice, and they continued, incessantly kept talking. And so I basically told them, all right, I'm basically done. So I'm going to give you guys 2 options. Option number 1 is I'm going to go to the counselor. We're going to have a meeting with your parents. And I'm going to make sure that you get enrolled out of my class, or enrolled into a different class, because there's no reason why I should have to deal with this. And they kind of looked at me like, wait, are you serious? And then I kind of let them pause. And I said, option number 2 is you guys will have to get up and find a seat separate from each other in the classroom. And that will be in your permanent spot. And that's all you get, basically. And from there, obviously they picked option number 2 because they wanted to stay in the class. And that kind of solved all the issues. And my kids saw that I was being serious. And so that's what I mean. Like, although the class can be a fun time and you can have that, that positive environment. But if things do get out of hand, I definitely like, I guess I show that I'm being serious when I need to be. So
When did you have that discussion with those students, those two students that you mentioned? Like, can you just kind of give us the context for that?
um so that was about in the first, I would say maybe the first, after the first month of teaching. So that was maybe late September or so. And it was kind of towards the beginning of the year. And I kind of wanted to establish, like, look, I'm not joking around. You know, if this is, I let them choose their seats in the beginning of the year. However, I told them, you know, if I see any issues, I will be coerced to move you. And so that's kind of what I did. And it kind of showed, at least that class, it kind of showed them, whoa, he is being serious. He wasn't, you know, he's not just all talk. Because in the end, actions speak louder than words. You can say whatever you want, but if you don't actually act upon it, the kids won't, in my opinion, the kids won't see anything from your words or any
And
value.
was that after class, before class, lunch?
The moving or the conversation with the
The
students?
conversation, yeah.
Oh, it was in the middle of class in front of everybody.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And you still have those students currently?
Oh yeah, they're all still there, and they behave so much better now that I moved them. And the thing is, like, it's kind of like a psychological trick. Like, I gave them the option so that they feel like they have power. At the same time, I also gave them the option to move wherever they want, as long as it's separate from each other. And so they still feel like they have somewhat control, and I'm not totally, like, I guess, dominating the field. But at the same time, it's, you know, benefits me. So that's what, like, I do need control of the classroom, and so to a degree.
Yeah. When you say that, I remember I had a job in sales for a very short amount of time, but one of the things they taught us in sales was something called the 2-option close. And the 2-option close is when you want to close on a customer, and so you present them with 2 options, and you don't care which one they take, because the idea is that they think they're making a decision when they're actually
Right.
just choosing from the 2 things that you presented them. And usually you make one of the offers kind of extreme, and then you tell them that it's an extreme offer, and then they'll think that they're being sensible by taking
Right.
the less extreme offer. So you say, oh, well, you probably don't need that. That would probably be for a different customer, but you're a sensible person, so you should probably choose option B, which is, it's a little more conservative. And so it's, yeah, like you said, it's mind tricks, right? And so mind tricks go a long way with students, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about your transition into teaching, and you mentioned the word autonomy. Can you speak to what type of autonomy you enjoy in the job, or is that something that you gravitated towards that you enjoy in the profession?
Well, so I mean, I think it's just my personality. I've always enjoyed, like if I say something, and then if I guess what I'm trying to say is, if I say something, I don't expect everyone to just do it. I do expect some sort of, like, opinion, or some sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like response from, I guess, my students. So for instance, like, I might assign an assignment, or I might assign or make a certain test a certain way, or what I've been experimenting in the last year, like having my lectures in performed in different ways. And then from there, I try to receive feedback from my students. I'm like, hey guys, okay, so I changed this lecture style. I changed my, the way I review for the test, or I changed up my test questions. What do you guys think? And so it kind of makes them, so I do like the autonomy, and I do like feeling like I am in control, I guess. But at the same time, I do want feedback from, especially my students. And I do take it from them, and I ask them all the time. And I also tell them I'm asking all my other periods, and I kind of want to see what you guys feel about this idea. And so it doesn't, so to them, it doesn't feel like I'm just the one in control all the time, because I do appreciate their feedback, and I do respond to them. I don't just, like, take their feedback and then ignore it. But so it's kind of like, yes, I'm making my decisions, but I'm also taking feedback for them. So yes, it's autonomy, but it's also constructive, I guess. I take the constructive criticism to heart as well. So.
I had in mind kind of the idea in thinking of other professions. Do you feel like you have more like freedom in what you do as far as you line up all the professions that are available to a person? Do you feel like teaching is pretty high as far as making your own decisions, or would you say it's lower? I don't know if that's a leading question.
I feel, okay, so that answer, I think, kind of depends. I'd better be able to answer that question with tenure, honestly.
Okay, for
What
sure.
I mean by
Yeah.
that is to a certain degree, I do have to, of course, like every other teacher, align to the standards. So in the classroom itself, I do feel like the student, at least in response to the students, they feel like I have total control, and I get to decide whatever I want. But in regards to, like, the actual profession, I'm still listening to, of course, the administration. I'm still listening to, I have a mentor coach, and he's the one, he works with me for induction. He works with me one-on-one every single week. We spend, like, at least an hour together. and I'm still listening to what he's saying and what he's doing and the ideas he presents. And then we have kind of like, you know, uh, discussions about how to approach certain things, because certain ideas that he presents, I may not totally agree with, in regards to how the students should be taught. And so we kind of discuss them, and then we usually come up with a pretty basic compromise. And so because he's the expert in NGSS, which is the new Common Core style of teaching science in California that California has adopted. So I do know that I have to align with certain standards. So it's kind of, I guess I have mixed feelings towards the autonomy. Like inside the classroom itself, yes, but in regards to the standards, not so much. At least in regards to, especially that I'm not tenured, I kind of have to do whatever my coach says, whatever the standards say. And I do know that there's some teachers that don't always do that. They don't always align with the standards, and that's up to them. But so far, I don't see an issue. I don't have any conflict with aligning with the standards. Like it is what it is. It's being taught, and I think it's really cool because Common Core with science, I don't know about other subjects, but with science, it kind of has students investigating a lot, and coming up with their own solutions. And you give them, materials, and they come up with the procedure rather than giving them a step-by-step instruction on how to do things. They kind of come up with a plan, and then they kind of run the experiment, and then they go, hey, this worked, or hey, this didn't work. How can I modify it? And so I like that idea, because in the real world, that's how it is especially in regards to collaboration. You kind of just, come up with a hypothesis, test it, see if it works. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And then you try something else. So.
Excellent. So in the vein of experimentation and students participating in kind of more critical learning when they're in your classroom, what would you say are some of the strategies that you are employing on a regular basis? And then what is kind of, if I were to walk into your classroom on a Thursday and students were there because there was no global pandemic, what would your classroom look like, and what type of strategies do you depend on in the classroom?
Okay, so if you were to walk in, especially at the beginning of class, the way I structure my class is I use the model of anticipatory sets, which is kind of like hooking the students, at the beginning of a certain period. So my students will walk in, and what they do every single day is they pull out a sheet that I give them at the start of the week. It's called a brain buster sheet, and what it correlates to, and it has the 5 days of the week in a box. And what it correlates to is a question that I pose on the board every single day before the class begins. The question of the brain buster is usually a question that somehow will segue into what the day is going to be about. So for instance, let's just say I was lecturing about the immune system. I will post a question that kind of has students think about, maybe I'll say like, what do you know about the immune system? Give me three to four bullet points. And then from there, the students will tell me everything they know. And then I'll open the class to discussion for the first 5 or so minutes of class. So they'll spend about a minute or two doing the actual question. And then the last 3 to 4 minutes, I'll kind of take questions and answers from different students. And then we'll open up to discussion. And then from there, I'll kind of see, okay, I want to know what they know. It allows me to gauge what they know. It's kind of activating prior knowledge. And then from what they know, I can kind of touch on during my lecture, let's just say, some of the points that they brought up. And so, for instance, if I were to be talking about, a certain cell type, and if a student had brought that up and, they stated that they knew that cell type, I'd say, as so-and-so just stated earlier, and then I'll kind of lead into it. And it gives them sort of like credit, I guess, for an acknowledgement for knowing what they knew. And then, so that's kind of how I start the class every single day. It's not always a segue into the lecture. Sometimes it could be, I also use as an opportunity to sometimes talk about whatever is going on in life. Like it could be like about the coronavirus. So we'll have a quick discussion about the coronavirus, especially lately. That's what we were doing. Or whatever it may be, if they're confused about something. And so I kind of I use it as an opportunity to shy away from specifically what we're going to learn about. And then I tie it back into, the unit or whatever it may be. And so what I also do is, if you were to walk into my, usually what I do once a quarter, if you were to walk into my class 2 weeks out of every quarter, I host positive psychology experiments, for 2 weeks out of every quarter. And for example, the last one that I did is I had students, every single day get up, find a partner, give that partner a compliment. So they, verbally did that for about 2 minutes, and then sit back down and then write about, kind of like journal about how the compliment made them feel. What was the interaction between the two people? And then from there, I gave them like a string where they had to go out on campus and find somebody, and then give them a positive compliment, tie the string around their wrist, and then come back the next day and write about, or on their brainbuster sheet, write about the interaction. And so I also use it as an opportunity to kind of spread positivity if I can, through campus. And so So although, positive psychology, although that those positive compliments don't necessarily, relate to the immune system, let's just say, or whatever unit that I'm teaching about, and especially in chemistry, it still, I think, gives students like a humane perspective, and a positive kind of like opening to the class, instead of just saying, hey guys, sit down, open, page 34, start reading or start doing this assignment. It's kind of like, okay, let's just spread a little bit of awareness. Let's talk about, what makes you happy. And then we can dive into, whatever it is that we're learning about, after priming their brains to be more positive. Because there's research that shows that if you prime anybody's brain to be positive rather than neutral or stressed, they are 3 times more creative and 37% more productive. And I can later tell you the book that I got that from. But I just think, like, I really take those studies to heart. And so I think that doing that is a awesome way to get students like started enrolling in class.
Fantastic. So when you put in a lot of effort into something like what you just described, and you have reluctant students, do you have strategies or tips for people coming out of the credential program and they're dealing with reluctant learners? And especially if you're really excited about a topic or a lesson, and then you have students that are in the back of the room with their arms crossed, or they've got AirPods in, or they got their head down on the desk and they just don't want to participate. Do you have any words of wisdom for the teachers that are encountering those students, of which there are many?
Yeah. So for me, my students call me a savage, like, and oftentimes because and they also say I have no chill. And what I mean by that is, like, I tell them straight up, like, I get very offended when you aren't talking to me. And I am a type of person, and I tell my class this all the time. I am an attention seeker. I think most teachers are. We like the attention. And what I mean by that is, when I'm talking or when I'm saying something, I don't like having someone else talk, and ignoring me while I'm talking. And I kind of give them an example. How would you feel if you're giving a conversation to someone and then all of a sudden they go on their phone and they completely ignore you? That's how I feel, and it insults me. And so I tell them, look, let's just say there's, like you said, there's a group of students on their AirPods or talking in the back when you're having a conversation. I will, and the students know this, I'll put them on the spot. I'll interrupt class and I'll kind of tell them, hey guys, like, if you want to talk, feel free, get up, get out of my class and talk outside. Then when you're done, come back, because right now you're a distraction to everybody else. And when I do that, usually, there's never been a case where they actually got up and left class, but it kind of like tells them, like, whoa, he's being serious. And so that's one strategy that I use. Like, I kind of tell them, look, like, I kind of give them, it's kind of like the autonomy thing, the mind tricks. I give them the power. You can talk, go for it. Just do it where you're not interrupting me, and do it somewhere else. And then they realize, like, okay, I was talking and I shouldn't do that anymore. Strategy number, like, I guess another strategy that I use is I use, like, the earlier, like, I want to say it's a threat, but it's kind of like telling them, like, look, like, I don't have time to deal with you while you're talking in my class. So if you want, you can switch out and find another teacher because that's willing to deal with it, because I'm just not. And so that's kind of what I mean by, like, no chill. Like, I just get to the point, I put them on the spot. I don't know if that's the best strategy in the world, but it works for me. And it has worked, and the students kind of get it. And it's kind of like that respect, I think, becomes established. It's like, look, he is being serious. He does genuinely, I think they feel that he does genuinely feel like he wants us to learn. And it is a form, and I tell them all the time, like, I don't know how you see it, but in my opinion, it's a total form of disrespect if you talk while I'm talking. And so, and I'm truly hurt by that. And they kind of see it as, whoa, he's not just, being this, like, a attention seeker. He's also genuinely, like, affected by it emotionally. So it's kind of like that empathy thing again.
Do you feel like you've had any students that walked in just completely turned off to science, that you were able to get excited about the topic?
So what you mean by that is, like, are you asking me, like, if they just don't care about the particular topic at the time?
Yeah, like if they walk into the room and you just get this vibe of, like, I have to be here, like, don't want to be here, I'm not interested in this. Like, I love auto shop and all I want to do is auto shop, and I could care less about anatomy, or I could care less about whatever
Right.
it is that you're teaching. Like, do you feel like you've been able to make connections with students and kind of sell them on your subject and your discipline? Or maybe it's okay to say no, obviously. I was just kind of curious if you've turned students around or turned them on to your subject.
Okay. So the way that I definitely make the subject relatable to students is, the way I see it is, no matter what topic that I'm discussing, or whatever topic in anatomy that I'm teaching about, I can always relate it to something that the students have experienced in their life. And so, for instance, I will say, like, have you ever, like, I'll give an example. Like, if I'm talking about the heart, have you ever had that feeling where you're running and all of a sudden you have that cramp, like in your gut, like in the right side of your gut, for example. And so I'll kind of, I guess, give examples of cases where like the students have experienced something like this. And then from there, I'll kind of cut the lecture. I'll kind of segue the lecture and then ask them, hey, describe to me an experience where you yourself have had this feeling, or when did you have this, or have any of you, like I was talking about EKGs last week. And then I asked students, hey, have you ever had an EKG, or have you ever heard of someone that had an EKG? And a lot of students, raised their hand and told me about experiences they had, or experiences that their family has had, or something like that. And so I guess my point is, rather than just having a dry run, here's the heart, guys, here's this muscle, here's that muscle, I constantly pause and I will ask students, to give me their personal experiences and their input on whatever it is they know, their prior knowledge. And then I will pick on, like, so the strategy that I use is I will sometimes pick on a student that I feel like is not paying attention, or just kind of, zoned out for that day or whatever it may be, and say, hey, have you ever experienced something like this? Or I will try to pose the question so that they can answer it, because sometimes they'll just say, no, I've never had this. And then I'll say, okay, tell me, a time where maybe you had this. And so usually I'll try to formulate my questions that way to get them engaged, to feel like, so that they feel like their opinion and their contribution does matter to the class.
Fantastic. Well, aside from the four walls of your classroom, I was curious if you could comment on maybe your biggest obstacle that you've encountered, as far as your career is concerned, or education.
Biggest obstacle.
I mean, it could be as it relates to the credential program. It could be the job hunt. It could be maybe you ended up in an internship and felt overwhelmed. I mean, students that we have in the credential program right now, they're under a lot of stress, because they have their student teaching assignment and they're responsible for the TPA, and some of them are still working part-time jobs. And so anything that we can bring in that's going to help them deal with tips to deal with stress, or encouraging stories about overcoming the demands of the profession when you're early in the profession. I don't know if you could speak to things of that nature.
I see. Okay. So do you want me to speak to my first year teaching, or in the credential program?
Which do you think would be more valuable for students to hear about?
Probably, I would say first year teaching, I suppose.
All right, let's hear about it.
Done, right?
Okay.
So I guess for me, so one of the main obstacles that I've encountered, especially, is when a student will come up to me telling me about certain personal problems that are going on in their life that I feel like I have very limited power, or potential impact and help that I can contribute to the student. So for example, I won't say any names, of course, but I have had a couple students tell me certain things, like their parents are going through divorces, or they are cutting themselves, or I don't know, another student saw her mom overdose on a certain drug. And it's like, like, to a certain degree, like, what do you tell a student whose mom, just was hospitalized for overdosing on a drug? And you can only say so much. And it's like, you can try to console them and tell them it's not their fault. But at the same time, it's like they're going home to that every day, and their mom is still not home, or is in 5150 or whatever. So I guess when certain things like that, when a student comes up to me with a personal issue, which actually happens a lot, a certain personal issue that I cannot control, what I just, the way I try to approach it is I try my best to be there for them and talk to them, because I feel like to a certain degree, that's all you can kind of do. If the situation needs to be reported, because we are all mandated reporters as teachers, of course, I will report it and go to the counselor and seek the appropriate measures to do that. And I have done that before a couple times. I actually did it during my student teaching too. I had a kid during my student teaching that she told me that she was being physically abused by her stepdad, I should say. And so I reported it, and like that was taken care of super quickly. Within 1 hour, 7 sheriffs showed up to her stepdad's house and arrested him. So I thought that was cool. And I felt like, wow, I did I was able to help in that situation. But it's not always like that. When a student comes up to you saying that they're cutting themselves, when the counselor just kind of states that like they're not harming anyone else, and so it's not a threat right now, you just have to keep talking to them. And I just kind of go, well, I do, and I try to, and I try my best to show them certain applications and things that they can do to kind of get their mind off it. But it's, an internal struggle. There's other things that's going on that I just don't know, or the kid is not willing to open up to. So I guess it's situations like that. Like I also had another kid recently. She told me that, so she lives with only her mom. Her dad lives in Florida. and her mom doesn't, she's 17, her mom just doesn't want her at home anymore. She's kicking her out with her sister. And so now she has to find a place to move to and to rent. And she has a part-time job, but she can't really afford living. And so it's kind of like, how do you help a student like that who not only has to balance school and get, grades, but also is dealing with a situation where she's getting kicked out of the house, and has to work more hours, lack of sleep now, has to find a place to rent, doesn't know the process of renting, what a security deposit is. So stuff like that, personal issues at home. So I think my biggest obstacle is the fact that students see me and I'm able to empathize with them means that they feel like they can, talk to me and relate to me. So they come to me during lunchtime, especially, or after school or whatever. And sometimes they tell me their problems, but at the same time, their problems are above my control to a certain degree. So I try my best to be there for them, but I also sometimes feel like I'm not able to help when situations like that are out of control.
If someone came to you and said that they were having a similar experience and they couldn't sleep at night, or it was really affecting them mentally, I mean, do you have any tips on working through kind of your inability to help someone, and it taking a personal toll on you, and maybe speaking to separating your personal and your professional life? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. What would you say to a person that was experiencing those issues?
So for me, there's definitely a cutoff between a personal life and a professional life, especially when it comes to teaching. So I would not ever recommend giving like personal contact information to students that are going through something like this, because I think they will take advantage of it. And if you're the one, let's just say outside of school, a student is contacting you, talking to you about their depression or like their feeling of whatever it may be, suicidal ideation. And if they do actually end up getting into a situation where they harm themselves, and if the last person they were talking to is you as a teacher, like you're the one that's going to be blamed as the teacher. So I think there's a point to which you have to kind of separate yourself, and you can only kind of do so much. And so I kind of tell myself that. And so what I do is I try my best to be there for whatever student it is. And what I mean by that is after class, as they're leaving, I kind of say, hey, if you want to, if you have time, we can talk sometime during this week at lunch or next week if you want. I kind of give them, again, it's like that. I give them the choice if they want to or not. And then I don't like set up a specific time or place. I kind of say, hey, like lunchtime, because I always have students in my class during lunchtime, if you want, we can talk like one-on-one for a bit. And when I do that, there's a certain part of my classroom that's kind of like separated from where all the students hang out. So it's still a bunch of students there, but they also feel like they can talk to me in a somewhat isolated, but not really isolated area. And so, I just constantly kind of check on them if I can, but at the same time, I can only do so much. And I do try my best to, if I feel like the situation needs it, I will email the parents. I'll say, hey, I think that maybe you should talk to your kid. This is what's going on. Your student has been telling me about certain issues. A lot of times parents don't even reply. So I kind of like, it is what it is, but that doesn't mean I should give up on it. And I do mention to the counselors, because a lot of students think the counselors are just there for academic support and just help them choose classes, when that's not true. They are also there, ideally to, talk with them with whatever situation that's going on. But a lot of students, from what I was told, don't see that. They don't think that. And so I think that's a huge disconnect. But as teachers, it's kind of like you're the one that's there with them every single day, not the counselor. So they usually will seek your help. But at the same time, you just have to have a realization that you can only do so much. And sometimes all they need is someone to talk to. And that's what I try to be that person.
Excellent. So you mentioned not providing personal information to students. Can you kind of speak to what you think of when you hear the word professionalism, what it means to be a professional in education, as far as your professionalism towards students, towards parents, and towards the administration? That's a pretty big question.
So what it means for what it means to be professional?
Yeah, I mean, if I said, Shadi, when I see you on campus, you really seem like a professional. Can you break that down for me? What tenets do you take to heart when you're trying to develop as a professional and make sure that you have a professional demeanor on campus? What are things that you keep in mind? Like rules for yourself that you follow, or things that you keep in mind when you're corresponding with parents and administrators? I don't know. Is that too vague?
No, okay. I have an idea.
Okay.
So I think for me, number one is your physical attire. I mean, this is kind of obvious, but like physical attire does matter in regards to looking professional, because I could have a certain behavior of acting professional, but if I'm wearing basketball shorts and a t-shirt, I think that society will only see me as professional to a certain degree if they don't know me prior to. And so looking like you're professional in terms of, attire in the classroom and on campus does matter to me. I think that is a huge factor in being professional. And then of course behavior. And so what I mean by that is whenever I walk into the office, I try my best to say hello to everyone. I try to my best to greet them and, at least, and of course smile, and to any coworker. And whenever I see my students around campus, I of course try my best to also say hi to them, and I try to my best to also mention their name so that they feel like, wow, he actually, like, this teacher actually knows me. I'm not just like a number on his, roster. Um, and in addition, for example, like in work meetings, they're like, the staff meetings that we have, where usually I think they're held once a month or so. Um, there are some teachers that I notice that, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but there's some teachers that I notice that will just speak out rather than raising their hand and just comment kind of whatever they want in the middle of the meetings. Whereas when I have something that I want to say or contribute, I will make sure to, raise my hand and wait patiently, in order to show I guess in my opinion, it shows a form of respect, to the administrator that's talking on the stage. And so that's just how I see it. And I feel that there's no reason to talk over other teachers. So.
Excellent. Those are fantastic tips. Are there any misconceptions about teaching that you'd like to address? Because, there's a lot in the media about teachers and public perception about teachers. And one thing that I always mention to my students in class is that teaching is one of, if not the only profession that everyone in the country has had an experience with that profession. And what I mean by that is that every single person has had teachers K-12 in their life. So everyone kind of has opinions about what education is and what it isn't. And that is to say that you haven't spent 10 years of your life around firefighters or policemen or veterinarians.
Right.
It's a profession that people grow up around. And then I think they develop some pretty calcified opinions on the profession. So is there anything that sticks out in your mind about teachers are ... or expectations that students graduating in the next couple of months might have about the profession that you think might be misguided?
So for me, this idea kind of stems from Dr. Ken Robinson. He is one of the biggest educator figures in the world. And he also has the most watched TED Talk in the history of TED Talk. It's called Schools Kill Creativity. It's a really good TED Talk, in my opinion. And I've read a couple of his books, and one of the ideas that he promotes, and this is what I believe in as a teacher, is that as teachers, students need a certain environment in order to thrive. So it's you can relate the way students can thrive and learn to Death Valley. And so Death Valley, for over 100 years, up to 2004, was pretty much, it's called Death Valley because no vegetation or life grows there. However, in 2004, in winter 2004, it rained for the first time in 100 years in Death Valley. And then in 2005, in spring, all of a sudden, there were blooms that started to grow. And what the idea was, Death Valley wasn't dead; it was just dormant. And all you needed was the right conditions for the buds to flourish. And so I think that concept can be applied to students as well. All students, I think, have the potential to be amazing, contributors to society. However, you will not be able to see their potential if you don't give them the conditions to which they can actually thrive in their own unique ways. And that means, it's kind of like back to, and I'm sure you guys have all heard this term, universal design of learning. Every student learns differently, so you have to kind of cope and adapt as a teacher. But so as a teacher, I try my best to use that motto as, I kind of put in my mind, like, all these students have the potential to be amazing contributors to society and have potentials to seek pretty much any career in which they want to aspire to. Therefore, as long as I try my best to kind of remind myself that, like, as long as I give them the conditions, they can thrive. And then the question becomes, what are those conditions? And that's how I try to approach my teaching style. And so, for example, like, one student, how I also see it, and this is from a different book. This professor, he's from Harvard. His name is Dr. Shawn Achor. And he describes students as as acorns. So and one acorn has the potential to, create a tree, right? But one acorn also, I can argue, one acorn also has the potential to make multiple trees, which therefore means one acorn has the potential to make an entire forest or multiple forests. So that potential is the same with students. One student has a potential to, to contribute and help hundreds of thousands of people in society. And so as long as you give them the right conditions, and the conditions in the acorn would be, water it, right soil, fertilizer, blah, blah, blah. But it's the same idea with students too. So that's how I kind of see my teaching style.
Excellent. Fantastic. Yeah, one of the things that I've been kind of thinking about in light of this coronavirus epidemic is they keep showing us these charts about how easily the disease can travel among people. So 3 people can become 9, and then 9 can become, I don't know, I'm not a math teacher, but exponential growth, right?
Right.
And so we're looking at exponential growth in a negative way, and we're thinking about how fast this disease could spread. And that if you were to just keep to yourself, you could potentially dampen the spread of that disease like thousands of times over, right? So if you take that idea and you flip it into a positive perspective and say like, look, if you were able to help 10 students and then 10 students were able to help 10 other students, and then we see exponential growth in a positive way, I mean, that can be a really like reassuring message about what
Absolutely.
we do as educators. So it's interesting to think about. But I really like that analogy that you brought up about Death Valley. I'd never heard that one. That's a really, really beautiful sentiment. Um, so you've already kind of spoken to it because you did have a career prior to teaching, but let's say that you had to leave education tomorrow for whatever reason. Do you have any ideas about what you would be doing?
Hmm. Um, at that point, I think I would. Oh, it's hard for me to imagine that, but
I know you just started, so.
yeah. I mean, okay. So a partial answer to that would be like if I had to leave teaching, I would maybe go into maybe a higher level of administration in education where I can maybe contribute as a kind of like a trickle effect. Maybe my, I don't know, my teaching style or implementation, or try my best to help a certain district in their education system. But if I had to leave education as a whole, I mean, because all I kind of know is medicine, I might go back into medicine. But at the same time, a part of me just feels like that's just not for me. So I think the next thing I would go into would be psychology. And so I would go into how I could spread, because I've read tons and tons of books on positive psychology. And so I think, maybe counseling or helping others, whether it be family therapy or whether it be other professions in psychology, especially as a, I don't know if I'd be a clinical psychologist, but as a family counselor or family psychologist, something like that, where I can just help other people. Because I guess my motto is like, you have one life. You want to. The way I see it is, I want to try my best to contribute and help as many people as I can in that one life. And so a career where I can do that is going to be definitely most optimal. So in education, that's where I see myself. I feel like I can help a lot of people. In medicine, I thought I could also do the same thing, same as psychology, but at the same time, it's like those are my current interests, so that's where I would see myself. And I'm sure there are others that I could impact people with too, but for my personal interest, that's where I would go.
I feel like those careers that you mentioned are in a lot of ways similar to teaching. Do you feel like could you tell me maybe 2 or 3 key character traits or aspects of a person's character that need to be developed to be a good teacher? I mean, what do you think the key ingredients are to being a good teacher? I know you've said the word empathy at least 6 or 7 times in this interview, so I have a feeling that's going to be on the list. Can you speak to
Yeah.
others or to why empathy is so important?
With empathy, so to me, okay, that's definitely a key point. That's definitely one I would have brought up. But with empathy, if the students just see you as a robot up there, they're designed to provide them instruction, I feel like they won't connect with you, and they'll just kind of sway off. Like how many? I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was an undergrad, there were tons of those professors that I felt like I was just a number in the stand. Initially, I went to UC Davis, and we had 512 students in one chemistry class, and I felt like I would never get to know the teacher. The teacher was just doing his job in order to do his research. Like he had his personal gains, and was just doing this because he had to, kind of a thing. I didn't feel any sort of connection, and then I started to doze off and kind of get bored of the lecture, and then I didn't feel a reason or a connection as to why I should even be here. So to give students that motivation, to give students that ability to persevere, to give students that grit, I think that the connecting with them gives them a sort of meaning behind, why they're there. And in order to connect with them, sometimes, and I'm not saying, give students your whole personal life. That's not the right approach. But I do think that here and there, giving appropriate personal examples of your own life as a teacher, of what maybe you've gone, some certain struggles that you've gone through that students can relate to. And that could be like, something you experienced in high school, or something that you've experienced personally at home or recently, or in a different career, or whatever it may be. Or even something you're experiencing as a first year teacher, like telling them, look guys, like honestly, I'm struggling. I used to spend 8 to 9 hours on a weekend grading. And I told them, like, look, I just spent the last 8 to 9 hours grading, guys. Like, I'm going through a bunch of stuff. Like, I pretty much had no life this last weekend, or any weekend really, as a first year teacher. Simply because I'm creating like curriculum for the first time, especially for honors chem. It's just a lot of work because it's never been done with Common Core before. So I'm the first year doing that. So I kind of tell them, this is what's going on. I'm going through a lot. So, I apologize if I'm a little bit slow today. And they see that, I think, and they kind of, sympathize with me, like, wow, he is going through a lot. So I won't give him a hard time and talk during the lecture or go on my phone as much or whatever it may be. And so I think just showing them that, like, you're a person too, that you have struggles too, that you go through stuff too. And you don't have to be super personal with what it is that you're going through. Like, you don't have to tell them about your relationship or whatever it may be, but just helping them realize that, like, just like you do, you have, just like students do, I have struggles. So if you guys could bear with me, and showing them that you're a human, I think allows them to relate better.
Excellent. Any other traits come to mind in addition to empathy?
As a teacher?
Yeah.
I think, so with me, I mentioned the word grit. And so that, I think that's huge to me. It's just kind of like and what I mean by grit is being able to persevere, being able to keep pushing. Like, there are certain students that you'll get to, that you'll be able to empathize with. There are other students that are going through certain situations that you might not ever get to or get through. But that doesn't mean that you should give up. I think that as a profession, like, in the end, like, you have to look at the higher goal. Like, you're seeking to help others and you're seeking to impact others. There's a saying, like, you could be teaching, like, look at that room 34, there's that teacher, he's teaching, but are the students learning? And so that's not necessarily true, right? So I think that in the end, like, you have to look at, ask yourself, why did you become a teacher? Why are you here to help others? And so I don't think that a lot of teachers, from what I see, they might take advantage of the tenure once they become tenured and kind of just start to slack off from there. And in the end, it's like, you have to seek a profession where you are helping, where your goals, your personal goals and personal attributes are aligned. And so for me, it is, I do want to help others, and with teaching I can. So therefore, I think that I can do better through that. And so I guess that's another, key point for me.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, hopefully you don't feel like we've already covered it, but I want to ask you what your favorite part about teaching is.
Favorite part about teaching?
Just when you think about your entire, your day, your week, your year, that you've chosen this path as your profession, just really what gets you to light up about the fact that this is what you do for work.
Right. Let's see. For me, so I have multiple favorite parts. So I'm trying to come up with.
That's the hard part, right?
Yeah. So I think for me, the biggest thing is being able to instill curiosity in my students. The big aha moments that students get, the epiphanies. So, because I will tell students certain experiences, like, for example, that I saw with patients, or that I can relate to them or relate to the topic. And I think that's why students enjoy one of the reasons why students enjoy my class is because, I'll be talking about, the cardiovascular system, which may seem mundane, but then I tell them about this one time we had a patient, like, that went into, AFib, and they almost died, and we had to do a trachea, cut open their throat, and then, so you could put a tube in there, and, like, they're just like, what, really? And so I kind of give them examples, and then I'll tell them, like, for example, I'll just give them like a relatable example, like, the reason why a blanket keeps you warm, like, when you touch a blanket, it's not like it's hot. It's like when you go touch a blanket, it's not like, oh, that blanket's hot, I'll use a different one. The way it keeps you warm is it just reflects your own body heat. And so that is why, like, and in certain clothing, depending on the thickness, the way they keep you warm is reflecting your own body heat, not because they themselves, those objects are warm. And the students will look at me and be like, I never thought about that. And then to me, it's like so obvious, but at the same time, it's just kind of like, those aha moments really get me going. And I'm just like, yes, like I love the feeling of I taught them something, they actually realized something, and then oftentimes they'll come back to me and say, wow, Mr. Safi, I told my friends or I told my parents what you told me, and they were like, that's so cool. And like, it's just like moments like that. And I've had so many of those, like moments like that. Or a student, I just had a student the other day tell me, or a week and a half ago, tell me like, Mr. Safi, like I just wanted to let you know, it's part of my positive psychology experiment. And they told me, Mr. Safi, I just wanted to let you know that like you are one of the few teachers that I genuinely feel like actually care about their students, and I genuinely feel that are able to relate with us. And a lot of us students, like we're high schoolers, so we won't say it to your face, but we do feel with you. We do appreciate you, and we do actually want to learn and enjoy being in your class. And I'm sure you've heard this a billion times, which I have. Like they tell me like I'm one of their favorite classes and stuff like that. And it's just like those moments like that. I'm just like, wow, these are the moments that I live for. These are the moments that make the profession like feel like I'm actually impacting and helping others. And when you start to get those moments kind of recurrently, you start to feel, wow, like in yourself, at least I do, like, wow, I am making a change. Like this is awesome. And so yeah, it's just like those aha moments and then moments of gratitude that I'm getting back from my students are my favorite part.
Excellent. Excellent. Fantastic. Well, this is going to be watched by students who are about 2 months out from it may be watched by other candidates, but primarily I have my students in mind right now, and they're about 2 months out from finishing their student teaching assignment. Some of them are on internships. They're going to get their credential. They're going to start the job search. They're going to hopefully become employed. With that audience in mind, is there anything that we didn't cover that you really feel like is important to say to that demographic?
I think so, especially when it comes to the interviews, when you guys are, if you haven't got a job yet, when you are like seeking to get that job in teaching, I think that one of the main things that I find to be most effective is giving, I mean, I'm sure you've heard this, but giving concrete examples in your actual teaching and student teaching of scenarios that apply to whatever it is that they're asking you about. So oftentimes the interviewers will say like, describe to me a time where, so-and-so happened. You don't want to say names, but you do want to, give an example of a time where, even if you can't give a concrete example to answer the question, at least give an example of something that happened with you and a student, an interaction that happened with you in the class or whatever it may be. I think giving the more examples that you give and in something that worked or a certain lesson that worked for you, and then describing that lesson with somewhat, succinct or meticulous detail, I think that really plays well with the students, especially if you find some sort of humor in it, is what I try my best to do, is give them a scenario where like that was funny, but also worked out, or like a humorous lesson. Like I always have my students, which is called TPR, like total physical response. So I have my students like get up when they're learning, and I have them like, especially in anatomy, like point to their bone, and then I'll have them do like a little game where whoever can point fastest or while closing their eyes, and still point to their certain bone, whatever it is that I tell them to point to, gets a certain candy or something, or like it gets an extra credit point or something like that. So I try to, then I remember I would give those examples in the interviews, and from what I saw, all the administration, people that interviewed me loved it. Also, this goes more into when you actually begin teaching. So there are tons of studies that show that, like I mentioned this before, but this comes from the book called The Happiness Advantage. It's a book from Harvard all about, positive psychology. If you prime students' brains to be positive before going through a stressful task, such as taking a test or a quiz, they are more likely to perform better. There are studies, and I've done this kind of like, I use my students kind of like as guinea pigs to do this. And so, for example, before a test, what I will do is like, especially like a unit test or something, or a quiz, what I will do is I will show them a quick snippet of a 3 to 4 minute, maybe or less, YouTube video that is generally funny and of course appropriate, like from the Ellen Show, or like a funny game that they played or something like that, that makes them laugh and makes them happy and kind of makes them de-stress from, because you know how like all students will cram right before a test. So I'll show them this quick 3-minute video, and then I'll have them take the test, and then I'll do that. And sometimes I remember I would do it for like one period and not the other. Then I'd compare the average scores to see which class performed better. And every single time that I do this, the classes that watched the video and were primed to be positive first outperformed the class that didn't, the class that was stressed. And then I'll switch it up and compare values. And then it's pretty much like concrete every single time. Other times I'll have students like get up before a test. I'll literally throw the test on the ground and be like, all right, get up, find someone. I want you to look them in their eyes person number one, what they're going to do is they're going to have a blank face. Person number two, you're going to try your best to smile for 7 seconds, while person number one tries their best to keep that straight face, and they always fail. Like they always end up laughing, and then they I switch it, and I just I make them basically laugh with each other, and then I tell them to go back to their test. And so my point is, like, before giving a test, students are always stressed about tests, like especially like those students that like feel like grades are everything. And so rather than having them stressed, try to de-stress them, find a way to make them, happy, or make them laugh, or tell a quick story to each other. Even if you have them just tell them a quick story about something that they're grateful for in the last 24 hours or whatever it may be. Show them a quick video. Because in the end, it's like, yes, they are there to learn, but at the same time, like you can have them enjoy their learning, especially before a stressful test. I mean, I've gone through so many times of high school and college where I was beyond stressed over a test, especially if not getting a certain amount of sleep or whatever. And so it's like, try to relieve that stress, because there are so many studies show that, like, if you're positive before committing something, you're more likely to be more accurate. So I mean, the studies don't lie. And I see it with myself, and you guys can test it too. So that's one piece of advice I would give.
Excellent. Well, speaking of books, I wanted to know if there are any books, and they don't have to be education related, although they could be, any books that we should be reading, any movies that we should watch, or any albums that we should be listening to that you've encountered in the last, I don't know, 6 months to a year that you would like to pass on that maybe we should check out.
Oh, definitely. Okay. So in terms of like filmography, TED Talks, there's certain ones by Dr. Ken Robinson. I can link those to you later if you want as well. And there are two in mind that I can think of. One of them talks about the Death Valley analogy that I gave you earlier. The other one is Schools Kill Creativity, which is the most watched TED Talk in the history of TED, as aforementioned. And those two TED Talks I think are super impactful. I've even showed them to my students before as well. They're super impactful, I think, and I think they will help some of you teachers and inspire you to realize, like, you're here to help others, you're here to impact students, and you're here to educate the youngins. And so those two are really good. And then two books, both by the same author, but if I were to pick one, it would be The Happiness Advantage by Dr. Shawn Achor from Harvard. He talks about positive psychology. There's a TED Talk by him too. And this TED Talk it's called something but for happiness. But and the other book is called Big Potential, also by Shawn Achor. But this TED Talk, I gave it to our superintendent, and I let her watch it, and she ended up so every quarter they have a staff meeting with all the administration from the entire district. And so every single vice principal, assistant principal, yada yada, they meet up once a quarter. And she showed that TED Talk that I showed her to all the admin. And a lot of the admin, like the principal from my site, came up to me and said, hey, this is a TED Talk that your superintendent gave credit to you for. It was awesome, blah, blah, blah. And so that's a good one too that I can link to you. And then that TED Talk is based off the book, The Happiness Advantage, the one I'm referring to. So it's an amazing book. It adheres to how you can change your lens in seeing success and happiness, because a lot of our parents, a lot of our students' parents will tell them, if you want to be happy, you must first be successful, and then you'll be happy, right? And the thing is, that formula has been proven to be backwards. Yeah. In the end, it's all about, like, seeing certain moments in your life, viewing the moment with a lens of positivity rather than negativity, that will lead to success. Because if you keep changing the goalposts of success, you'll never get there. Your brain never gets there. Like, first I have to graduate high school, then I have to graduate college, then I have to find a job, then I have to find a better job, then I have to find a house, then I have to get married, blah 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 blah. And it's like your brain never truly gets to happiness, because there's always something else. You don't have to worry about retirement or whatever. And so rather than it basically talks about, rather than viewing life that way, you change the formula, and I don't want to kind of give it away yet, but there's ways to seek happiness in the current moment and in your life differently. So
fantastic. Well, on behalf of my students, thank you so much for your time. So much wisdom and things that students can take to heart as they're getting ready to receive that credential. So we can't thank you enough.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Cool. Whoops. So